Are you
So I
gonna,
would invite any gentlemen out there listening who are going to be in the area to come and join us.
and are you going to do any Thibodeau and Boudreaux jokes? Or
I actually don't have any plan this time, but I
Okay.
might have to think of one, right?
Yeah, you might. If you would like to talk with Carlo, if you'd like to get a Catholic question answered, you're very welcome to call 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. That's what we do. We answer questions about the Catholic faith, whether you're Catholic or not Catholic. Anybody can call. We love questions from anybody. And if the question is a little bit challenging, it's perfectly all right. We're happy to take it. 888-318-7884. Marie, have you seen the movie about the Yetis? It's called Smallfoot.
No,
You haven't?
I haven't seen
How
it yet,
can that
but
be?
I've watched the trailer a few times, and I want to, but I probably see a movie once a month.
Yeah.
Not on purpose. It's just busy, so
But you have nieces and nephews.
I do.
Yeah,
but
so
my
that's-
nephew in San Diego isn't. He's
not there
4
yet.
months old, so he's not watching any
It's
movies.
a perfect
yet.
excuse. It's a perfect excuse to
Like,
go to the
I
movie.
need him
I need to take him to the movies.
yeah.
Yeah. But you saw it, Carlo. I know you did.
Yeah, I actually follow that philosophy. I love watching these animated movies, so I use my kids as excuses. So when it comes to animated movies and like the Marvel movies,
Yeah.
for the animated smaller kid ones, I get to say, well, I get to take my kids to go watch it. And for the Marvel movies, I'm like, yeah, my 14-year-old boy wants to go watch it, so I got to take him and his friends. But of course, I love
Building childhood experiences, okay?
Right.
I love watching these movies, and indeed, last week or a couple of weeks ago, I took my kids to watch the Smallfoot, and I can't remember who puts it out or whatever, but all I remember is that it was a pretty darn good movie, and surprisingly, I must say, I enjoyed it. It was a great film. It wasn't sort of the best, at the ranks at the top, with the best of Cars and stuff like that. But it was good, and I was surprised at the philosophical concepts that were embedded in the movie. I tell you, just having a philosophical mind, it was like sparks were just going off and flying. I had my phone, and I was like taking notes throughout the
my
entire
goodness.
movie.
Wait, I just want to get this
Going
clear.
to watch a movie
Carlo
with a
went to see
philosopher is
Smallfoot,
the worst.
And he was taking notes.
Yeah, and
Carlo wants
and
a
it was
discussion.
it was so delightful. I spent 15 or 20 minutes in the Suburban after the movie with my kids, explaining to them everything that I was
love that.
catching. But it was interesting, man, because when you start watching the movie, and I don't think any of what I'm going to say is like a spoiler alert or anything, but when you start watching the movie, you begin to get a sense that this is going to be. It seems as if it's going to have an anti-religious theme to it.
Okay.
And so I started to get a little bit worried. I immediately started collecting my thoughts and how I was going to talk to my kids about it, to try and divert that after the show. And I even looked up an article real quick to see, and it was like, yeah, anti-religious theme. And you immediately get the sense that they're portraying this overbearing religious tradition that governs the Yeti community or the Yeti tribe up in this mountain in the clouds, right? And the wise man, the leader of the tribe, has these stones. He wears the stones, and each of their beliefs are etched in the stones, right? Well, in the opening song, the main character, Migo, is singing the song, right? And so he's going about singing it, and within the midst of the song, they have this scene where the skeptic society, right, this group of millennials of Yetis who are questioning the belief traditions.
Oh, so this sounds like an agenda. This sounds like a Hollywood agenda.
Totally. I was totally like, oh, okay, here we go, right?
Yeah.
And so what we discover is that the skeptics, and part of the belief tradition was that the mountain in the clouds was on the back of mammoths, woolly mammoths, right?
Oh, okay.
And so one
So
of the
they had never come down.
right, they
Okay.
they were always on the mountain, and they had never gone below the clouds. Okay, so they didn't know what was below the clouds. Okay, and then of course the whole movie is about Smallfoot, a human being that doesn't exist. That was the whole point. Human beings don't exist. So the skeptic society was like, "Ooh, we think they do exist," So in this scene, one of the characters talking to children says, "So you believe we're supported by mammoths?" And the children go, "Mm-hmm." Like they agree. And then the other skeptic character says, well, what's holding up the mammoths? Right? And then Migo, the main character, comes and talks to the children to settle them down and says, it's just mammoths all the way down.
Oh, man.
You see that?
Yeah.
It's just mammoths all the way down.
Which is an atheist argument.
Which is an atheist argument. And he goes on to say, they're questioning the stones, and we don't do that, right? But what I noticed, and that was one of the first clues that I began to realize, well, wait a minute. I immediately thought that the belief tradition they were going to make fun of and make light of was like a Christian belief, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Just religion in general. But in fact, the belief tradition they were poking fun of and making light of and showing to be unreasonable, in fact, was unreasonable, because you cannot have an infinite number, an infinite series of mammoths going all the way down to explain why the mountain is being held up in the middle above the clouds, right? And this idea of an infinite series of causes, where one cause, in as much as it's doing its stuff, right? It's holding up the mountain, right? The mammoth's holding up the mountain. In as much as it's doing that, it depends upon another cause, and in as much as that cause is causing the other cause, is depending upon another cause, right? In philosophy, we actually call this an essentially ordered series of causes, of caused causes, which is distinct from what is called an accidental series, where like grandfather begets father who begets son, right?
Right.
That's a temporal series where the generating activity of grandpa is not essential to grandson exercising his generating activity, right?
Okay, got it.
Grandpa can die and grandson still is able to do his generating activity, right? Okay. That's an accidentally ordered series. But an essentially ordered series is like the links, the chain links holding up a flower pot or a lamp, going up and being held up by
so if
the
any
hook.
one of them is missing,
Yes, without the hook, right?
Yeah.
Can you explain the lamp being suspended in midair with an infinite number of links in the chain?
no, that wouldn't work.
That wouldn't work. You have to have something outside.
That it's hanging on.
That's right. Something outside of the series of chain links, right?
Yeah.
Such as a hook in the ceiling that's holding it up. Similarly, this idea of an infinite number of woolly mammoths holding up the mountain, right?
It is, in fact, unreasonable to think that.
It is unintelligible. You have to have something outside of the series of the mammoths, right? That would give the mammoths the power in the first place to be holding every other mammoth.
Right.
And then ultimately the mountain. So
It all points back to a creator.
That's right. You got to have the earth, right? Well, that same principle applies to just causes in general. In philosophy, we get on the level of causality as such. So you can't have an infinite series of caused causes without something outside the series of causes
Yeah.
that doesn't rely on some other cause, but that is uncaused. That uncaused cause is what we call God. This is Aquinas' second way in the Summa Theologiae. So notice how this very principle in the movie is something that atheism must hold to in order to be consistent in its intellectual framework. But it's that fundamental presupposition that's unreasonable and
Right. Like,
non-intelligible.
what if I said, instead of mammoths, I said, well, the universe bursts into being at the Big Bang, and then it collapses, and then another universe bursts, and it just goes on like that forever. Well, you can't. That would be like mammoths all the way down.
In one sense, actually, that would be a misunderstanding of the of the type of argument that we're arguing. Because remember, we're not talking about going back in time.
Oh, okay. We're talking about the
here and right now. So the fact that the mountain is being held up by one mammoth, which is being held up by another mammoth, which is being held up by another mammoth. That's like we are existing right now because of the heat and the light being generated from the nuclear fusion in the activity of the sun, which in turn at the same time is dependent and caused by other forces of nature, which in turn are dependent and caused by other things of the material universe.
And who caused all of this?
And so the point is that in this network of causes, right here and right now,
I gotcha.
there has to be something outside the network itself, outside the series itself, that's giving all of these causes the power that they have to cause in the first place. because you have to have a source
Yep.
from which that causal power comes, ultimately speaking. Without that source, there would be no causal power as such. That ultimate source that doesn't rely on anything for its causal power is an uncaused cause, which we call God.
That's Carlo Broussard. He's an apologist here at Catholic Answers. The only person I know who would take his kids to see a movie about Yeti and come back
And there's more.
regaling us with stories of Aquinas' second proof of God's existence.
And there's more where that came from.
This is Cy Kellett, and you're listening to Catholic Answers today on Radio Maria US, a Christian voice in your home. We're talking with assistant producer Marie and Carlo. So now you're going to go see Yeti, right, Marie?
I don't know.
So that
Yes,
you can become,
I will
become
go
fully
see it.
Catholic and understand.
Fully Catholic.
Okay, so let me. So Carlo, you see this movie Yeti. It's starting to look like, oh, they're going to rip on religious belief. They're going
Right.
to do a kind of Hollywood thing and try to convince kids overcome religion. That's how you
Question your
yeah.
religion, etc.
But-
And there's a kernel of truth in that.
But the religion that they're poking fun at turns out to be an atheistic.
It
religion.
seems
It
like
seems-
that.
Okay.
At least the clues that were given seem to point in that direction. Whether the authors were, is it an author? Is it a
The
director? The
producers?
producer? Whatever. Whether the producers were intending that, I have no idea. But that was part of the overbearing belief tradition, which is an element of the atheistic worldview, right?
Right.
And then there are other places in the movie where it talks about how as you descend down the series of mammoths into nothingness. So the idea, so in one part they talk about the infinite series of mammoths. In another scene it talks about how you descend, if you fall off the mountain and you go through the clouds, you descend into nothingness. And the idea of something being dependent on
Nothing.
sheer nothingness.
Yes.
And that's yet another philosophical concept that is irrational. To say that you can have something dependent on or coming from sheer nothingness is absolutely incoherent. It violates what we know as the principle of sufficient reason. Right? In order to have something, you have to have something to
That causes it.
actualize that causes it and actualizes its potentials. Well, that something can either have the explanation for its existence within itself, within its own nature, like it just simply exists and that's what its nature is, like God. And if it's not God and it doesn't have the explanation for its own existence, it must come from something outside of itself. So you can't have some sort of contingent thing, something that doesn't necessarily have to exist, right? Just having its existence without it being caused outside of itself. So anything outside of God or an understanding of what God is, having the sufficient reason for its existence within its own nature, it's going to have to be caused by something else. So a mountain, right? That's a material thing, right? It's contingent by nature. It doesn't have to exist. It doesn't have existence by its very nature. It could be or not be, right?
Yeah.
So apparently it doesn't have existence by its very essence or being. So it's going to have to receive its existence
From something
outside of itself. So yet that's
This is how we argue in a rational way. Or one of the ways. Aquinas has 5 of them.
Right.
For the existence of God, where we say by the light of reason you can know that God exists.
Yes.
That doesn't mean that you're gonna use your reason in that way, or
Correct.
that maybe there might be even a block on your reason, whether
Correct.
it's a bias or an emotional wound or something that keeps your reason. But
it is possible.
But in general, any reasonable person
Is
can come to
capable.
know
Right.
outside of religion,
Right.
outside of faith, that God exists, because it can't be mammoths all the way down.
Yeah, that's right. Outside of supernatural religion, because religion also can be understood in a natural way.
I see.
Natural religion, coming to know that God exists by the natural light of human reason, directing our lives to Him, apart from any sort of supernatural religion or revelation.
Yeah, I was just going to add that we've had Dr. Trasankos around a lot lately, which has been such a blessing, and she was at our Faith and Science conference earlier last month.
Who's Dr. Trasankos?
She is a chemist extraordinaire, and she converted to the faith, and I feel that she had a deeper understanding of the atom than I will ever have in my life,
Yeah.
and using science as her first questions, she came to God. I mean, she came to God through science because she realized that
I think it
there
was
must be a creator.
right. It was, and I think it was primarily she realized I have questions that science can't answer,
Amen.
and those have to do with why.
That's
And-
right. And
and-
her how questions led her down the series
To-
to things that are smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller to the subatomic realm, right? In
Yes.
quantum physics, etc. But ultimately, the how questions can only lead you so far, right?
Yep.
They can tell you what is there, but then you have to ask the fundamental question, well, why do these fundamental things have existence in the first place?
Yeah.
And why do they exist in this way rather than some other way?
I think that's what it was for her. Is
That's
that
right.
is more the sense of the incredible order she saw in all of it, like the way she at our recent conference described photosynthesis from the point of view of a chemist who had tried to replicate photosynthesis, and it took about, I don't know, 8 or 10 minutes for her to, and what she described goes on in every single leaf everywhere on the planet, more complex than the greatest minds in physics and chemistry can replicate. You can't if you could replicate it, we'd have no energy crisis. But they
Right.
can't do it. And that order
Yeah.
of things, and that's reasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not a proof necessarily, but it's a reasonable prompt to say, how did all this order get here?
That's right. You bring up a great point, Sai, because we can distinguish between taking that data and then making a reasonable, credible conclusion and saying, well, based upon that order, we can reasonably infer an intelligence behind the order.
Yeah.
But we can also use the data, I would argue, to actually prove God's existence, but in a different way.
Right.
And this would employ Aquinas' fifth way from his Summa Theologiae, where he looks at these things that do what they do. Stacy kept saying at the conference, electrons do what they do, right?
Yeah.
What that means philosophically is that they have a specific nature
Yeah.
that has inherent directed tendencies to produce certain effects, to behave in a certain way, just like the tree outside behaves in a certain way, the bushes and us humans, right?
Right.
We behave in certain ways given the kinds of things that we are, right? Well, for Aquinas, even that directed activity itself is a starting point for reasoning to an absolute intelligence that is not directed in its intellectual activity by anything outside of itself. An absolute directing intelligence that directs all things
Right.
within the created order to their ends,
Yeah.
given the kinds of things that they are. And that absolute intelligence behind all of this directed activity we see within the world is what we call God. And so that's the beauty of the empirical evidence that Stacy is talking about and that others put forward, the order and the complexity. Number one, it shows us how far down things go, but ultimately we're going to have to come to an answer to the question of why these things are the way they are rather than some other way, no matter how complex or not complex they are, right?
Yeah.
And that ultimate answer is God, the uncaused cause. But then also looking at all of this stuff and how they have directed activity. They behave in certain ways given the kinds of things that they
Yeah.
are, which requires ultimately an absolute undirected intelligence.
I'm going to trust you on that. And I think that's, I mean, most of the fact that Aquinas did it and proved in 5 different ways that God exists and any reasonable mind, we don't have to, though. Like, if
Right.
you don't have, I got to know those 5 proofs. You can, and they can be very helpful to you. But I can also go, well, Carlo understands them, and
That's
I
right.
trust Carlo. That's okay, too. Well, do you understand them? Have you ever gone through the 5
You know, I think in college we may have talked about them for half a minute, but I mean I couldn't explain them to you, but I do think that we have people around us who do understand them and who do explain them in a reasonable way.
Right.
And you know, faith is not just based on proof; it's also the Holy Spirit. So I think
Yes.
you know, sometimes you can know something with your head and it doesn't always travel to your heart.
Right.
So-
Faith is a response. See, that you bring up a great point, Si, because belief in God, you have two pathways to that to assent to the truth that God exists.
Oh, okay.
So one pathway is by the natural light of human reason, through which you can prove that God exists, and I know that God exists, and if I deny the truth of that proposition, then it leads to certain logical contradictions.
Right.
Okay. But then the other pathway is one of faith, one of belief, which is also a rational approach. As you mentioned, many people have not worked through the various metaphysical demonstrations for God's existence or the reasonable arguments for God's existence that are not demonstrative but give good reason to believe.
Yeah.
Right? Many people have not gone through those types of arguments, but they do.
The
still
majority of the people in this
believe-
studio, I would say. If there's three of us here, the majority have not
Yeah.
gone through all
That's
those.
right. And they still believe in God's existence and assent to his existence based on, it's not that it's in a blind impulse of the mind.
No, that's
you've-
right.
As you've already,
Yeah.
you've both said, you believe based on the credible testimony of those who have studied the arguments,
Yeah.
or based upon the credible testimony of those you trust. You could even
And based on experience too, though, Carlo.
Amen.
Yes.
Because experience does come into play, which gives you good reason to assent to the truth that God exists. And then you could also say that you believe based upon the testimony of Jesus Christ. And that's a great person
That's actually
to base your belief
Right.
on.
It's very, very reasonable.
Because he
Right.
rose from the dead, etc. And we know that through history. So even though you don't know that God exists via argumentation or
Yeah.
philosophical discourse, but you assert, I know God exists through faith and through belief, that faith and belief is still rational
Right.
because it's based upon credible testimony. And so either of the two paths is a legitimate path. I mean, even Aquinas would articulate it in this way and say, yeah, we can prove that God exists, but that doesn't mean you can't have faith, right?
Yeah.
You can still believe that God exists via faith, even though somebody could come to know it apart from faith by the natural light of human reason.
I think a lot of non-believers, or maybe people who are just questioning, often think that faith is blind and that
Yes.
faith is
Right.
just this really wishful thinking that somebody out there is taking care of us, and it really is not. I mean, I think you both can attest to the fact that you probably didn't come to your faith by saying, God, if you're out there, I'm gonna, step in front of this bus right now, and if you're there, I'm not gonna get hit, or something like that. It's not like, oh, I'm gonna test God, and if he's there, he's gonna give me this answer right now. It's based on so much more than just wishful thinking.
Right.
And like that, the history of the scriptures and of our early church fathers and of Jesus
And of
speak-
all the saints.
and the saints
yeah.
speak so loudly.
Right.
And I always, like, in times of doubt in my faith, I always look to the saints, because I think if this weren't true, they wouldn't have died for this. And if this weren't true, they wouldn't have, given their entire life to this. They're definitely encouraging in times like that.
I always find it's also the case, though, that like when you I think we just celebrated the feast of St. Francis, and it's not just that they gave their lives for Jesus, these people like St. Francis, but what their lives became, to me, is always a win. Like, that is the
Right.
truth. That's what a real, full human being is like.
Yeah.
And it's so attractive and so beautiful. And you can't deny the beauty of their lives, the saints.
And I think, like, obviously other people who aren't Christians have given their life for things.
Sure.
But the person who follows Christ, who gives their life to him, their life is marked with peace and love,
Amen, sister.
which
at,
is
at a level that seems to far exceed peace and tranquility and sort of the good-natured person has apart
Yes.
from Christ. So and these are all good pieces of evidence that one could look to, sort of a convergence, right, of
Yeah.
evidence
It all points. It's like an
Sure.
arrow that points.
that one could use to base their belief on, sort of, because many of the new atheists will critique religion and say, well, the vice of any religion is belief without evidence, whereas
But the thing is, we've always said that
and-
belief without evidence is wrong.
that's right. That may be the case for some religions,
Yeah.
but it's not the case for Christianity, because it's not belief without evidence. It's a belief that's in response to evidence,
Yeah.
and there are many different evidence sets.
You're listening to Catholic Answers Today on Radio Maria US, a Christian voice in your home. I am Cy Kellett, your host. We're joined in studio by assistant producer Marie and Carlo Broussard, and we got off on a tangent because Carlo saw the movie Smallfoot, which is a movie about Yetis, and it's a cartoon about
humans.
Yetis, and we got, and now I am extremely distracted. I want to get back to Smallfoot because I'm not done with you in Smallfoot.
There's
but
a few more details.
Yeah, I
could point.
imagine so. But I'm extremely distracted by Marie's fingernails. Did you see her
Oh, I'm
fingernails?
sorry.
What's up with this? You have sparkles on your
I
fingernails.
do.
I have not seen this before.
There's glitter on them.
Is it fingernail glitter or is it just regular glitter?
It's nail polish glitter.
Nail polish glitter,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's like clear nail polish and it has glitter in it.
Yeah.
But I hate to say it, I don't think that's what the people on the radio want to hear about.
I think that's one of the most important things is what distracts me.
I
That's-
did it because it looked cheerful to me, and I
It
like
does look
cheerful things.
And you're a cheerful person.
Thank
And
you.
that points to the philosophical concept
here we
that we do everything
There is
for the sake of being happy.
Yes, we do everything for the sake of being happy.
She
right. okay.
perceived something in that nail polish that was going to satisfy some desire and make her happy. Otherwise, she wouldn't have done it.
But isn't it
Right.
something like if I so
It's like for everybody watching.
There you go.
There they are.
but beauty is something that makes us happy.
Amen to that.
Doing
goodness.
beautiful things and
Sure.
experiencing beauty, both of those things make us happy.
Indeed, it does.
What is that, Marie?
I
yes.
I would like
Don't
to
raise your hand.
I would like. I was a teacher, so I do raise my hand. But anyway, I on the subject of beauty, we're having a series here in San Diego, Beauty, Truth, Goodness, Theology on Tap
Oh,
series.
okay. Yeah.
And we just had Erica Tai from Be a Heart Design in LA come down and talk about beauty, and it was so inspiring. She had worked in Brazil after she graduated from college as basically a missionary art teacher, and when she first got there, the classroom that she was teaching these kids in was dirty and gross and really run down, and they didn't have any real, tables and chairs and things like that. And she made the wonderful observation, and I think maybe this is why we have artists in the world and why I admire them so much, because she saw that the kids didn't want to be there because it wasn't a beautiful place to be.
Right.
And I think we sell ourselves short so much of the time because, like, I think, oh, well, I don't need to, this doesn't have to be beautiful. I just need to do it, or this doesn't have to be beautiful. I just need to get through this or whatever. And beauty is one of the traits of God
Right.
that,
Yeah.
she knew that her kids there needed it. And when she made the classroom a beautiful place, then they didn't cry anymore when they had to go
Beautiful.
there.
Wow.
And, they
Even-
were able
there's-
to learn.
There's a high school principal somewhere in the U.S. I saw a story about him somewhere that every week he gets fresh cut flowers and he puts them around the high school. And somebody was bothering him about, we don't have the budget for that. And he said, if you think beauty is not essential to learning, then you're missing something. You're missing the point. And actually, I think it makes a big difference.
Yep.
All right, so go ahead.
Sorry, last comment. I think beauty too goes beyond just flowers or a beautiful place to work or whatever it is. I think beauty is most represented in the way that we speak to people, and
Oh.
I think people. I maybe it's just in my life, but I've encountered a lot of people who are very careless about the way that they speak. And they don't mind speaking cruelly about other people, or they speak using a lot of perhaps not kind language, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I think that people, sometimes lose sight of the fact that they're presenting beauty and goodness to somebody in the way that they speak, or they're not.
It's not something like even manners are beautiful. Like having good manners is a way of being of. That's a very good point, Marie.
Yeah.
Because you're more than just fingernails, Marie.
Yeah, given the conventions of manners are, agreed upon within society, but the underlying principle is that those manners are meant to point towards something that is good, some noble principle, some virtue, whatever the gesture may be.
Right.
In some cultures it might be belching. Hey, that, in some cultures that represents this was a good meal. I'm very grateful for it. Thank you. That's a compliment. So even though the external activity itself can vary among cultures, the underlying principles or virtues that they're intended to express, given the conventions of the day, are what has to do with beauty, because the point being that those manners are meant to point toward that which is good. So getting to the behavior of people and how we relate to people and speak to people, it manifests the goodness that we recognize in them, our own moral goodness. And that goodness of morality within self, the goodness of the dignity of the other human being, is a beautiful thing, right? So beauty is intrinsically related to that which is good, and goodness is related to that which is. Given the philosophical framework of Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas, these are called transcendentals. They all piggyback on one another. Something is, and so far as something is, it's true. It's also good. It's also beautiful. And then, of course, getting to work environment and the schoolroom and order and symmetry, right, to affect the human being, because we're not just angels, we're not pure spirits, we're embodied spirits, we're a body-soul unity. So we have to be able to perceive and sense order and symmetry and beauty, and that's going to affect us intellectually. Just to kind of share a little personal experience with you, like if the paper on my desk is like crooked, I have to fix it.
That's not beauty. That is obsession.
That's called OCD.
Yeah, that's called Carlo.
We'll call someone for you.
I can't proceed intellectually unless my desk is
Having
ordered.
a clean, organized space to work in.
Sure.
Yeah, or
Now-
putting on a good shirt when you come into the radio studio.
Right. Well, the way that you present yourself
Sure.
says to the other person more than anything else.
Yeah.
You matter to me.
Yeah, I respect your time and your eyes.
Which is why you told me before I came in the studio today to do the show.
Take off the hoodie.
Take off the black hoodie and put
Yeah.
on a good shirt. And look, I have a nice shirt on, and I feel like I'm respecting both of you.
Yeah, I can remember from my undergraduate studies, one of my professors used to talk about the theology of clothing. And he would encourage the students in the classroom to be sure and come to class, not in your pajamas, not in your PJs with your slippers, right? But to actually, not, dress to the nines, but to make yourself presentable in the classroom, because that helps intellectually. It helps you be more attentive. It helps you focus. You begin to treat that which you're doing and the activity that you're engaging in as something that's important, that's valuable, not something that's mundane. And I mean, listen, you go to bed, right? You roll out of bed, and you're like groggy. It's just nothing's going on. It's not important, although sleep is kind of important, right? But the point being is that if we treat the activity as something valuable rather than something less valuable, we're going to engage in that activity better, and we're going to flourish in that activity.
Right.
I want to
We
give
do
away a
that
couple.
for Mass,
I want to
too.
give away a couple copies of his book. Is that all right?
I think that's a great idea.
Prepare the Way: Overcoming Obstacles to God, the Gospel, and the Church is Carlo's book. It's good for people who might want to help others to overcome an obstacle they might have to experiencing God or to receiving the gospel or living as a member of the church, and we'd like to give it to you. We've been just chatting, and so we haven't gone to the phones very much. So now, if you have a question for us on any aspect of the Catholic faith, we welcome your call. The number is 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. And for the rest of the show, anybody who gets in to ask a question will get a free copy of Carlo's book, Prepare the Way, Overcoming Obstacles to God, the Gospel, and the Church. By the way, that phone number can be spelled out to 888-31-TRUTH. Isn't that impressive?
That's so impressive.
Yeah.
I just want to say, too, about Carlo's book, that I think we meet so many people in our line of work that have somebody who's fallen away from the faith in their family, or a good friend of theirs, or it's like a grandmother worried about their grandson. It happens in a lot of families, and this book is to help those people to overcome the things that are holding them back from coming to Christ. And I think, is there anything more valuable than that? I mean, a lot of people, and this is something I actually kind of want to hear more about if we have time, but Carlo talks about in the book, some people say, well, so many bad things happen in the world. How could a good God exist when so much evil is present in the world? And he answers that question. And, maybe you wouldn't be able to give an answer to your family member, but he lays it out for you so
it's like a
that
help
you don't
guide.
have to
Right.
you don't have to be a philosopher. You can read this and you can explain it to someone that you love.
Yeah, that's in the
Well, thank
Prepare
you,
the Way.
Marie.
That's in the section
You're
Prepare the Way for
welcome.
God.
I do think
I'll
that's
slip
great.
you your $10 bill.
Yeah, it's like,
I'm really impressed that Marie, good for you. Good for you for
oh my
bringing that up.
goodness.
She's actually reading our
guys-
products, man.
I know. I was going to say.
You're
she's
underestimate. No,
No, I'm not
I really,
underestimating you. I'm thinking, boy, how much did he pay you for that? For that
I
kind of
think
commentary.
it's so valuable.
Yeah,
I mean,
yes.
I have friends that I want to be better about explaining.
All right. Well, I'm going to
that
ask you to
to.
wrap something up. Then I
Yeah.
want to
Okay.
put a little bow on this. You went to see Smallfoot.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
You had some kind of philosophical reverie that you went into.
Oh,
Afterwards, you broke your children down into discussion groups on the philosophy of the movie Smallfoot. Just, are you going to write about it so I can tell people where to go and read about it?
Yeah,
And
I actually have a piece coming out that should be going, if my editor accepts it. We'll see. But it should be coming out tomorrow at Catholic.com for our Catholic Answers magazine online.
No, yeah.
Wonderful.
So,
That's our website, Catholic.com.
That's right. So the piece will explain the idea of why the mammoths can't go all the way down, right?
Yeah.
So the movie raises the intellectual puzzle, but obviously doesn't settle it, just raises it. So I offer a solution to show why that position that there could be an infinite series of an essentially ordered series of causes without God, right? Why that is irrational.
All right, now, because I want to get to Marie's question, because I know a lot of people are like, that is actually my question. I want, because this is one of the primary obstacles to faith in God is, if God is good, why is there so much bad? Did I phrase it right, Marie?
That was not eloquent, but correct.
Thank you. I don't always speak beautifully. But I'm working
Hey,
on that.
brother, just join the club, man. Me and you are best friends. Because
right,
I do not speak beautifully.
So, as inelegantly as I phrased it, how do you address that in the book?
Well, I mean, there are two problems you have to distinguish, which most apologists do, and I think it's correct, between an intellectual problem and an emotional problem. Because, I mean, some people just are frustrated with evil, and they don't know how to find purpose and meaning in their suffering. They're in the dark. They want some light. And so the answer to the intellectual problem is going to seem cold and abstract, right? And it doesn't really do much for the person emotionally, right? And we all struggle with the problem of evil emotionally. We don't like evil, right? But just because we don't like something doesn't count against God. It's not a proof that God doesn't exist. But if the person is on the intellectual plane and sees an all-good God and the existence of evil as logically contradictory or logically incompatible, well, then we can employ the tool of philosophy and begin addressing that obstacle to try to overcome that obstacle and address that problem. And I think fundamentally, as I point out in the book, guys, is that the assumption that underlies or undergirds the objection from the problem of evil is that in order for somebody to be perfectly good, he or she must do away with all evil as far as possible, right? So if you're all good and you have the power to vanquish the evil, then you must do so. Otherwise, you're not good. But I would actually challenge that assumption. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I mean, any of us who have kids and with parents, we all know that we permit a lot of evil in our family lives because we are aware of greater goods that will come about. So when my children get a bobo, mom cleans out the bobo. Notice mom cleans it out, not me, because otherwise I faint, right? Because I have a weak stomach with blood.
What a man.
But
what a man.
But when mom cleans bobo, she's inflicting a physical evil, physical pain,
Suffering,
right?
yeah.
Suffering on my children. And I have the power to stop her, right? But because I don't stop my wife from inflicting that suffering, does that count against my goodness as a father? No, it doesn't. Why? Because I am aware of a greater good that the permission of this evil creates an opportunity for, right? I permit that evil because it allows for the opportunity for healing of the wound,
Yes.
right? Another scenario is, in some cases, an evil can be permitted lest a great good be done away with, lest we lose a great good. And in the book, I use the example of somebody who's, a ruler of a kingdom or somebody in government, right? In charge, has care over the community. And let's say, for argument's sake, that contraception is an intrinsic evil. Now, we know it is, but let's, if I'm talking to an atheist, obviously they probably won't accept that. But let's just say, for argument's sake, it is the case that in this community, contraception is intrinsically evil. Now, does it count against the ruler's goodness to not police the use of contraception? You see?
Yeah.
It's reasonable for the ruler to say, we're not going to sell that stuff. We're not going to promote that stuff, right?
Yes.
But if the ruler makes a law, you cannot use it, and I begin to police the use of it,
Right.
well, then how you're going to do that? The only way to do that is to violate the good of privacy that belongs to the intimacy of the sexual act, right?
Right.
So there's one scenario where it's within good reason for the ruler. It's in accord with his goodness to permit, people to use contraception and not police it, for him not to police it, right? Lest he lose a great good. Now, once again, it's within right reason for him to say, we're not going to sell this stuff, this is not good, we're not going to enshrine this in our code of conduct, etc. But to actually police it, right? His refusal to police it is coheres with his goodness, lest a great good be lost. Similarly, these same principles can apply to God, right? It's in accord with his goodness to permit a suffering, some evil in the world, on condition that he will use that suffering as an opportunity to bring about a greater good.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
Or to permit that evil in the world, or even the possibility of an evil, lest some greater good be lost.
Can I give an example and
Yeah.
see if this fits? When Jesus talks about the wheat growing up with the weeds, basically, and he says, if you pull up the weeds,
You'll also pull up the wheat.
pull up the wheat.
Yeah, because in their initial stages, they look like each other.
Okay,
So you can't distinguish one from the other.
he says, I gotta. The farmer has to let them grow and then throw the weeds out and keep the wheat.
Right.
Now, this I would assume is a parable about good people and bad people.
Right.
Um,
But
so
the principle applies.
But
some
yeah.
great good may be lost. In as much as you pull the weeds, what you think to be weeds, you might be plucking the wheat.
Right.
So a great good is lost by acting in order to prevent
Right.
the evil.
Right. So you have to allow the evil so that the wheat can come to its maturity.
In some cases, it coheres with goodness to permit the evil, lest some greater good be lost. And another clear example of this is even the nobility of rational creatures, human beings such as us, and even the angels, being able to choose God over and above rejecting God. So like God could create rational creatures with the beatific vision, and we couldn't choose anything but God. But he chooses to create angels. He created the angels in that state of condition, and human beings in a condition without the beatific vision, to where we have to make a choice whether to choose him or reject him in order to be with him in the beatific vision.
Right.
There's a great nobility in having the opportunity to participate in God's providence of leading ourselves, of leading us to our perfection. So we actually get to participate in his providence of leading ourselves to perfection and being real causes of the effect of our perfection. There's a great nobility in that cooperation with God's providential plan. But of course, with that comes the possibility of moral evil.
And and is it also true that there's a great dignity not just in choosing for ourselves, but being able to help each other so that we can be a help to someone else's salvation? God permits that.
And this is where God permits suffering and uses that suffering as opportunity to lead others to the great good of being participants in each other's salvation. So
I think that's one of the most beautiful things about our faith. Obviously, our God is all powerful. He could do all of this by himself, and yet he gives us the opportunity to be his voice or his hands to someone else.
yeah, this is key, Marie, because once again this ties into the idea of the great nobility that God has given us in being able to cooperate with him in governing a world and leading the world to its ultimate perfection. God could have done that by himself. He could have given us our own perfection without our cooperation. He could have created the world in a state of perfection without our cooperation. But that he creates us in a way to cooperate with him, there's a great nobility in that, but that gives rise to the possibility of evil in the world, and even physical evil. But God is willing to allow the possibility of those evils given the end that he is looking for or looking to achieve in cooperation with us.
Yeah.
No, that's
It's mind-blowing.
Marie says, yeah.
Sorry.
Now, of course,
I'm a
that's
millennial from Southern California. Sorry.
now, of course, that's the philosophical concept, and then if we would want to put on our theology cap and look at the light that Christianity shines in the midst of the darkness, that given the fallen world, given suffering in the world, God does not leave mankind orphan, but that takes a discordant note of suffering and evil and writes a whole new symphony with it, you see? And that is what we call redemptive suffering, whereby one who suffers in and through and with Jesus Christ out of love for Christ can contribute not only to one's own salvation, but also the salvation of others, and engage in heroic sacrifice in bringing about spiritual freedom for others.
Caller on the line, Haas in Nebraska, watching on YouTube. Haas, nice to speak with you again. We're always happy when you call. Your question for Carlo.
Yeah, hey, Carlo. I got a philosophical question since you brought it up.
Okay.
How can you think of the essence of a thing without thinking of a thing? The physicalness of it, like
Okay,
leaf.
yeah.
The form of it. You know,
Yeah.
like you can't like think of like a maple leaf, like the color of it or the shape of it, but it still exists. So
Okay.
like,
Yeah, okay, very, very good question, Hoss. And so what Hoss is getting to here is the idea of universals, or the form or the essence of something that's considered in an abstract way, and the form, the essence, or the universals that is considered in the concrete. So, Hoss, fundamentally, to answer your question, whenever I think of man as rational animal, My knowledge of the essence is knowledge of the universal, which only exists in an abstract way. The universal itself only exists in the intellect. But the universal exists in a concrete. Whenever rational animal exists inside, it's in an instance. So it's not the universal because it's in the concrete. The universal only exists in the intellect, understood in an abstract way.
Haas, thanks for asking a really hard philosophical question with 1 minute to go in the show. But we're going to send you a copy of Carlo's book, Prepare the Way, Overcoming Obstacles to God, the Gospel, and the Church. Assistant producer Marie, thank you for a very fine hour.
Thank you.
And Carlo Broussard, thank you.
You're welcome, Cy. It was a joy, man.
You've been listening to Catholic Answers today on Radio Maria. You can always listen on radiomaria.us anytime or catch us on your local Radio Maria station.